G'day. This week I was asked to have a look at a couple of Jacobs type chucks. There were two of those. One of them was, the question was, is the chuck any good? The second question was, can you get the arbor out? And so I had to go at those. But doing that reminded me that I had a couple of chucks here which I had to give a bit of attention to. So there was a keyless chuck where I wanted to replace the jaws, and there was one that I wanted to swap an arbor over. So that's basically what's going to be this in this video, is a collection of chuck bits. Hope it's useful to you.
This is the chuck under test. It's an old Jacobs, so just near the top of the spindle here. I reckon I'd give that about 0.07 of a millimetre run out. And now down near the bottom of the spindle. So that's about 0.12. That's not too bad. This is the more refined way of separating an arbor from a chuck. These things, I don't even know what they're called. Well, let's refer to them as drill wedges. You put them on like so, with the two bevels facing that way, and then with a vise or a press of some sort, squeeze those together. It relies on there being a decent step between the arbor and the chuck, but also these things are sized. So this is for a number 6 Jacobs taper. You can get them for just about any size Jacobs taper you like, but they tend not to fit too much on other tapers. And so if you're doing a lot of drill chucks and you can afford to buy, you know, the 5 or 6 sets of these that you'll need for the common arbors and chucks that you get. But if you're one of these people who occasionally takes a chuck apart, if you can't borrow or find a set of these on hand, it's the drilling through that you can use to get the things apart. One of the problems with these chucks is getting the arbor out when you want to change that over. This is a Morse 2, and it probably needs to be a Morse 3 now. This one got beaten up a little bit, and so I've gone and taken the burrs off. You can see down the bottom of the chuck there, possibly, just about. There we go. It's close enough. There's a drill indentation. Okay, that's how these chucks are made. Now, one way of getting them off is to mount them up and then drill a hole in there so you can actually basically whack the arbor out. So you might just be able to make out there the drill hole that I've put in. So I can now get a punch in there and hopefully punch that arbor out. You can't do this with with keyless chucks, because they use a mechanism which sits in there. So if you drill through that, you've probably just killed the chuck. But for these old key types, that bit is soft, and you can drill through and hopefully punch out. There it is, drilled out. Doesn't hurt them. In fact, I've heard of some people who actually drill a hole before they mount the chuck just so they can get it out. Looking at the Jacobs taper here, it actually looks quite smooth and clean, and so the chances are that this chuck has suffered no ill effects. That can be re-arbored.
Small pause here for a flat battery. I've never taken this particular chuck apart before, so I don't know what I'm going to find in here. Hopefully it's not too awful, but we'll have to see. If you're going to do this permanently, rather than using the V block here to hold the
the base of the chuck, you might want to make up some custom blocks. I don't have that here because, well, I take one of these things apart once every 6 months or so. But if you're doing this professionally in a tool room or something like that, you might actually have some blocks made up. Chain grips for taking the barrel off are wonderful things. Okay, that's off, and that screws off. Now, instantly from that we say yuck. It certainly needs a clean. The reason that I wanted to take this apart was the jaws, because I felt the slight catch in there, and sure enough, when you look at the jaws there, they've been beaten around a little bit. So I've got some spare jaws. They're not quite as bad as I thought they'd be, but I'll strip this apart on the bench and show you what the rest of it looks like, because that'll show you firstly why you can't just drill straight through one of these, but also how you do actually get it apart. So the first bit you saw me take off was the I don't know what you'd call it, the undoing ring. It sits on this piece back here. Just unscrews. The knurl on this, as you can see, is pretty worn down, so I'll put that into my solvent tin and give that a bit of a wash. I think this part is called the hood. It needs a good clean, so that can go in too. Then there are the jaws. Now, I'm not going to replace these, but they come out. The jaw guide, as you can see, looks pretty awful, so that needs to be fixed. You can see the jaw guide there. It's all this wonderful rusty looking stuff. That comes out, and I'll get a clean. Now this part, if you ever have to take one of these apart, do not grease that screw, because the whole friction thing works based on that screw. But these are the bits that the jaws, this is the bit that the jaw sits in, like so, and that's pushing that up, and so you can see why you can't go drilling a hole through there, because if you do that, you'll basically knacker the screw. So what you need to do, if you ever want to take an arbor out of one of these things, it's basically that. Okay, now you can put a punch in there and punch that out. However, as you can see on here, there's a whole bunch of balls. Okay, those do need to be greased when you go apart, but they're absolutely filthy as well, and that's why I put the bit of rag down, was to catch them. So they'll go in and I'll get a bit of a wash, and hopefully I haven't lost any. This shouldn't have been difficult to get out, but you might just be able to pick, there's a bright line with a very dark line shadowing it, just there, and that seems to be about it, but that would be enough. There's only 0.03 or something like that of a millimetre clearance between this part and the bit that it slides into, this bit. What I've used here is a bit of whiteboard pen, and that gives you a very thin layer, which will then wipe off if you rub it. And so if you've got two parts which are meant to fit together and they're not quite working, a bit of whiteboard pen might help. I'm going to have to get a bit of emery onto that and just remove that lip, I think. So I just went off camera to tighten that up again, sort of the reverse of doing the of taking it apart. They're quite a nice chuck when you get to take them apart. They're all ground, which is why they don't seem to damage terribly easily, and you have to take off burrs like that. As you can see from the balls, you can't have any. That has to fit nicely there, because if it doesn't, when you bash it in, it's going to do all sorts of things to knocking the balls out of the race. So I just glued them in with a bit of grease. I did eventually knock the arbor out. It's looking a bit worse for wear in a couple of places. I'm glad I did. I'll try and get a better arbor than that. It's a Jacobs number 2, but it looks like it's been horribly turned down by someone to make it into a stub. But there you go. The last thing to do is to put the ring back on. Once again, a reverse of what you did before. Use a screwdriver to just push it apart, pop it on, and then just do the screw up. Incidentally, the using the emery inside the hood there to scuff it up, that's a Guy Letard trick. If anybody's read his bedside readers, but that's one of the things he was told by the Albrecht people, apparently, when he went to visit their factory. It just gives the grease that I put on the inside the hood there somewhere to stick, and just helps a little bit. But with that tight, no grease on the screw, the balls greased up, a little bit of grease in the hood, that should be good for quite some time now. To complete our drill chuck extravaganza, these are a set of homemade wedges that I've made up. I want to pop this little chuck off. That's a 3-degree roundabout angle, slot up there, and the way they're used is they're put on things like that, and then into the vise, and that pops the chuck off. So if you can get them, they're a very easy way of removing chucks, but you have to have wedges the right size, and finding J0 wedges is difficult. You also have to have a shoulder on the arbor. This is the chuck that's has gone on now. It's another keyless chuck. I quite like these, as you may have noticed, guessed. This thing itself is called a sensitive drill attachment, and it's basically a spring-loaded shaft, as you can see, and that's got a bearing in it. So when you're drilling small holes, you can put a small bit in there, have that sitting in your drill press, and just pull down on that without having to worry about the rack and pinion on the drill press not being sensitive enough to feel what the drill's doing. The other nice thing about these is, if you've got a battery drill, you can put that in the battery drill and use that just as a steady. So if you're drilling a small hole with a battery drill and you're back here, that makes that much easier to keep that thing steady and not snap a drill bit.
I hope this collection of disjointed bits and pieces has been of interest to people, and thanks to Guy Letard. I first saw the stripping down of an Albrecht chucked in his machinist's bedside reader number 3. It's also on the Albrecht website as well, but thanks to Guy.